everyone for taking the time, especially to come downtown, even though people like us are already here downtown, to come join us as we formally launch Eunike Ventures and our Alliance program. So let's kick it to the next slide. Just to kind of, we wanted to bring kind of a broad perspective of our ecosystem here. So these are some of the people that are here today, ranging from Han, Nightscape, Altera. You know, we go down to, we've got some of the global energy mentors, Indigo, from Media, JBT, Houston Chronicle. Over up in the far right corner, we've got, you know, our alliance partners who are Anadarko, Hess Corporation, and Equinor, as well as we've got some colleagues from Chevron and Shell. And we also have a few startups here as well. We thought this would be a great opportunity to, when we kick this off, have some of the broad ecosystem people here as well. Oh, and in addition to that, I don't want to forget, we also have the Canadian Trade Organization. We have Jethro from Japan, as well as the Australian Trade Organization. So thank you all for coming, yeah? Okay, a little bit about Eunike. In addition, we're not going to go through the whole Eunike model. We have brochures that you can pick up front. But essentially, the question we get asked a lot of times is, how did you start this thing? Why did you start this thing? Where did it all begin? And so, firstly, in about 2016, Thomas, my other co-founder, and I started doing work at HTC as advisors for the Ignition program. And it was during that process where we saw kind of pockets of technology and innovation, as well as pockets of various ecosystem players. But what we saw as experienced energy professionals who worked in large IOCs and operating companies. My background is predominantly with Shell and Petronas. Our whole team has got a broad perspective ranging from Chevron, Shell, Murphy, BHP. So we were looking at this, startups were kind of being coached and trained more from an MBA perspective. And at the end of their program, they kind of graduated. They may get a little bit of seed money, but we still were not making the connection to the customers. So through that process, some of those companies did not know what they were developing was actually what the customers needed at the end of the day. And making that jump from graduating their kind of pitch graduation and getting them over to customers was a difficult proposition. So what we did is we started to have a dialogue with Equinor. I have Aberjeet here, so Aberjeet, raise your hand over there. Raise it high, yeah. So my first question to Aberjeet, I met him at a Station Houston event at one of the Shark Tanks. And I asked him, I said, I don't see you at some of the core kind of ecosystem events a lot, you know, like the HTC and Station Houston. I said, what do you see as a corporate VC as the gaps? And we kind of started that dialogue. And then we kind of went over our business model. We wanted to become a hybrid accelerator, which was essentially pairing like-minded operators with energy professionals and, you know, kind of looking at technology, looking where we could share data, get them to the field, and focus on technology, kind of implementation and, you know, access at the end of the day. So next slide, Thomas. So, show them on the right slide here. Okay, so with this, you know, energy, we hear this a lot, you know, energy is very, very different than doing it silicon-based. You know, it's not, we're not developing a consumer product, or we're not developing a consumer service, right? There are legal ramifications, there are HSCs, we have to worry about our people. These are difficult terrain sometimes, working offshore and onshore. There's a lot more that has to go into developing that technology and getting acceptance. So here, what our fundamental kind of premise is it's really not about the funding. I'm not saying that you don't need funding, any startup will tell you they need funding. That's a common thing. But that is not the primary motive of why some of these technology companies aren't moving forward. So some of our discussion with Equinor and then with Anadarko, with Jose Silva, as well as with Rob from Hess, was when we looked at some of these startups, really they need to be able to pivot to the customer's needs. Right? They may have developed a technology, but it did not necessarily fit with what the customer wanted. Secondly, we need to be able to provide them with a test bed of customers to go to. Typically larger companies. I work with Shell Technology Ventures. Thomas has worked with Shell Game Changer. That process takes a very, very long time. It takes probably a little over 2 years. So it's looking at something that we could do in a more rapid manner. And so the other thing is we have to ensure that the technology has the potential to become commercially viable. It doesn't make sense for us to work with technology startups, bring them around to the operators, have them do a field trial, and at the end of the day, they're not commercially viable. There's many reasons. Some may do this as maybe a hobby. Some may not have the vision and have a longer-term roadmap. We have to work with companies that are going to be around. If that technology is successful, that will be there to work with the operators as a future customer. Okay, next slide. Oh, and I guess I forgot the part on the customer side. Here, what we're saying here is basically when it comes to the customers, we need to just have that mindset and ability of our operators, right? They need to be able to be like-minded. They have to be willing to share what data they can, share success as well as failures. They have to be able to accelerate and make quick decisions out of the standard process. And basically recognize that you do have failures when you do this and be willing to fail and fail fast. So these were kind of the key areas of what we want our startups to do as well as the expectations from our customers. And it's really about building that bridge and connection between those two communities. Okay, next slide. As I was thinking about this, and I never knew this before, which I thought was very, very interesting, going back to where I say funding is not everything. I think sometimes we hear in our communities, when we look at teams, we tend to look at, the pedigree of the teams, we look at the funding, how well-rounded they are. But I thought when it came to aviation, a great example here were the Wright brothers and Langley. And so when you compare both of them who are competing, to first flight, it was really interesting. The Wright brothers just ran a bicycle shop. They never graduated high school. Whereas Langley was a very well-respected astronomer and physicist. He worked at the U.S. Naval Academy as a math professor. He was the director of the Smithsonian, and he'd written some books on aviation. And the Wright brothers were fascinated with the idea of flight since they were little from a little helicopter toy their father had given. So they were fascinated in reading, and they always liked the concept of flight. Whereas Langley only really got into this when he was in his 50s. Both of them had the Smithsonian connection, so they had the same type of networks that they could tap into. So you didn't have one having access to the Smithsonian and the other one's not. And I think what's even more interesting is when you look at this, Langley had a $50,000 grant, which was a lot in those days to fund his experiments. Whereas the Wright brothers only spent maybe about $2,000 US, and that was money from their bicycle shop. And the only thing they asked from their contacts was, can you give me a list of good reading books on aviation? And the Wright brothers didn't get a lot of press attention, really zero, because no one really had any pictures of their first flight, whereas the New York Times were following Langley all around. And I think the end product is even more interesting was the fact that even though the Wright brothers were successful, as soon as Langley heard that they were successful, he quit and dropped out. So it goes to kind of some of the things that we look at when we look at startups. We look at, do they have the passion? Why are they doing this? It's not necessarily the funding that is holding them back. It is that drive and will to succeed. You will encounter failures. The Wright brothers had serious failures after this, which resulted in the first death in aviation. Whereas Langley here, he just gave up. It would have been a good opportunity for him to then go and collaborate with the Wright brothers to work on their knowledge in this area. So I think you look at people who are willing to pivot and change what they've done. And one thing I didn't put up there was Langley, part of this process is he continued to spend more money on areas that just didn't work. So that continued to spend the money and not change your direction. So I think it's an interesting story of kind of how we look at startups, how some become successful, others don't. And so with our model, we've got more people who are going to speak. It's just not about Eunike, okay? This is just more to kind of kick off our official introduction into the ecosystem, but there are many more players at heart. We have alliance partners, and so I'm going to ask each one of them to come up and say a few words. And then after that, I'm going to have one of our official startups that is in the Eunike program to share his experiences. It's not to tell about Eunike, but it's for him to explain what his experience has been like, experience working with the operators, working in a different model. He may have pros and cons, but I think it's good to hear from the startup's perspective. And we also like to thank all the people who have contributed to us. It's not just our team. We work and network and share ideas with many other people. We work with Nick Tillman, who is a former HTC Energy Director and CEO of a startup company out of Rice. Ted Bostick with WellSense, who's over there, who started with us, talking about the technology chasm. And Hani from Shell, we've had lots of discussions just because our former background is with Shell and discussing Shell Game Changer and what works and what doesn't work. And Andrew Poon is another contributor that we've worked with as well from more of the sales and marketing side of companies and what they need. So without much further ado, I'll ask Rob to be the first person to speak from Hess. Thank you.
So thank you, Amy, and thank you for inviting us and hosting this unique event. So I had to remind myself, what's the origin of Eunike? And my lawyer kept calling it Eunike, and I thought, why is she doing that? So I remembered a bit about what Thomas had said about it, but I went back on the internet and found out, okay, for those of you that don't know, Eunike is Norwegian, or Norsk origin word, and it means good victories. And so, that's really why Hess is a part of this, is we're looking for good victories. We're looking for good victories that create breakthroughs in the technology space, those that can help us increase recovery, those that can help us get oil out of the ground faster or production rate, those can help us cut costs in both capital and operating expense, and those that can help us keep the patch safer and cleaner. So it's a great opportunity for us to come together to do that. But what's different? So the E&P industry has had a tremendous track record of success. Many of you are witnessing or benefiting from that now as the United States has now once again become the greatest producer in the world and grown greatly over a very short period of time. That's all technology, right? But the challenges are ahead of us. So we look forward to 2040. And we see that most of what we're producing today is going to have declined. And if you look at it, we're going to need 80 to 100 million barrels of additional production by then, estimated to cost some $6 trillion in investment. So this little bit of 10 million barrels a day that we just added through unconventionals is huge, but we got a much bigger challenge we face going forward. And that challenge is not going to be met by solving problems the same old way. And that's what we think is great about Eunike. It's the first of its kind to really bring into our space this opportunity for collaboration between the startups and the operating companies to create something different and something special. So we are appreciative of all the efforts here, particularly the operating companies. So Equinor and Anadarko, for your spirit to support this, to realize that it is an ecosystem that has to be nurtured and supported, and it's between us two as well to collaborate. And to the Eunike team, who's really put a heck of a lot of effort in a short time to go from a concept to a reality with tonight's launch. I left my glass at the table, but I'd like to say here's to good victories for the startups, good victories for the operating companies, good victories for the ecosystem impacting the city of Houston, and good victories to Eunike Ventures who brought this all together. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. That is wonderful. Next person that I'm going to invite up to speak is Abhijit from Equinor. Or Equinor Technology Ventures, correct? How does Equinor say?
Obviously, I don't have a great speech like you guys. But I would like to say it has not been a short journey. It's been, more than 18 months almost that I met Amy first time and we started talking. It had gone through a lot of challenges, and we're obviously legal. Our car is here. Thanks for all the legal support from all companies. It's definitely been challenging, and I think Jose can support this statement. Is we almost gave up probably 1 year ago because we couldn't we couldn't get people on board. But luckily we didn't give up, and then Hess joined, and it's been good. It's been very good. My day-to-day job is investing in startup technologies, and the biggest challenge I've seen in investing in startup technology companies is we normally ask them, what is your revenue? So how do you get revenue? I mean, if they don't go and implement and prove the technologies and operators are not willing to use it, there's no revenue. So we're actually putting ourselves in bind in a way. So we said in our venture unit also, we've been very much focused on implementation of startup technologies. So when Amy approached me about this concept, I think I was sold on immediately, and collaboration with other operators definitely helps to de-risk potential technologies. So I had to convince my boss in Norway and the whole ladder to buy into this concept. But at the end of the day, they understood that if we can give startups the platform to implement or prove their technologies, I think that's the best thing we can do for them. And meanwhile, while they are doing the pilots, we can watch them closely and all, and then obviously make a decision to invest in them or not. So that actually ends up helping us, the investment arm. Fortunately, we're the only investment arm, I guess, in this alliance, so that's an added benefit for us. But thanks to Anadarko and Hess for that. So the other thing I would like to say is I think Eunike is working with a couple more operators, so hopefully we'll get some of those guys on board quickly. And the Houston ecosystem is huge. There are a lot of operators, so in my opinion, there's room for a lot of operators to collaborate like this if they're willing to. And the collaboration for us have gone to a level that we are willing to share a lot more details in this setting than just meeting people at conferences and telling them some high-level news and all without going details. So this is definitely much more helpful in my opinion. And one quote that Rob used to mention, rising tide lifts all boats. I think that has helped a lot to sell this concept internally. So thanks for that. Thank you.